Carl Pope, and I'm the executive director of the Sierra Club. I grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. during the McCarthy era in the 60s. And I learned about government by reading the style section of the Washington Post. So I never bought the civics class notion of what it was all supposed to be about. And I think the combination of the place and the time led me to think the only interesting thing worth doing was trying to change society. I went into the civil rights movement. I was in Arkansas with Freedom Summer in 1965. I organized the Hospital Workers Union in Boston, or I helped organize it, sneaking into what was then Peter Bennett Brigham Hospital at 6 a.m. in the morning and sticking leaflets in workers' lockers, terrified that the security guards were to come and I suppose asked me to leave. I don't know what else they'd have done to a college kid at that point. And then I went into India in the Peace Corps for 2 years, working in public health. I came back, it was 1970, and what seemed to be happening was Earth Day. I really wasn't an environmentalist. I mean, I liked the outdoors, I liked camping, but I didn't think of myself as a conservationist. And I got into the environmental movement in 1970, and 37 years later, here I am. Well, there were a number of influences. My parents were important influences. I watched their unhappiness as a lot of their friends. We were never touched directly by McCarthyism, but certainly a lot of our friends were. And so that left a very bad taste in my mouth. I had a high school teacher who I believe is now the district attorney in Montgomery County, Maryland, who was a big fan of the Mexican Revolution. Taught me about Zapata and all those guys. And then I think the civil rights movement was a very early and present force. I mean, Marion Barry, who later became the mayor of Washington, D.C. and got into various kinds of trouble, was at that point a field organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I remember when I was in high school, we had a fundraiser for him at our house. So there was a lot of exposure to those kinds of things that I think helped shape me. Well, by the time I was, let's say, 15, 16, I don't think I had much of a concept before that. I sort of imagined I'd be working for the government, which I never have done. I thought I'd go work in international development. I thought I'd work for the UN. I thought I'd work for AID. I thought I'd work for the State Department. Then I went to India with the Peace Corps. And I was in a part of India that was very poor, where it was just after a famine. People were dying, starving. It was pretty clear that the reason people were starving was because the people who were running that particular part of India at that particular moment really didn't care very much. And yet I realized that as an American, I actually didn't have any role in deciding who was running the show. And I shouldn't. I didn't want to. So I realized that I wasn't cut out to be an expat. So then I had to come back to the United States and reinvent myself, because I'd spent what by that time seemed like a lot of my life. I mean, I studied this stuff in college for 4 years. I learned Arabic. I went to India. I learned Hindi. I had like 6 years of my life at 24 invested in the foreign gig. And it became pretty clear the foreign gig wasn't going to work for me. So I was a little bit confused. And as I said, environmentalism just came along.